Hey guys, tonight we're slipping into the soft candlelight of 17th century Italy. The air smells faintly of ink, old paper, and roasted chestnuts from a cart outside. Somewhere in Florence, someone's yelling about Jupiter again. Horses clatter on cobblestones. Church bells echo off old stone walls, tucked behind a creaky wooden door. You, freshly employed you can call it. That's the lowliest assistant to one of the loudest minds of the century, Galileo Galilei. This job might sound cool now, but buckle up. Between the math drills, telescope polishings, and near rests, you probably won't survive this internship without a stress ulcer. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and the local time in the comments. I love seeing where and when you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Florence in 1609 isn't exactly what you'd call intern-friendly. There's no HR department, no coffee machine, just a sweaty genius pacing in sandals, muttering about moons. She arrived with a half-torn note from a university professor and a satchel full of ink-stained parchment. Galileo barely looks up. He grunts, waves you in, and tells you to boil some eggs. For a moment, you're not sure if this is the right house or a strange hostel. The house creaks with books. Ancient volumes are stacked in piles that might be defying gravity more than Galileo's theories. Somewhere near the fireplace, a box of dusty lenses teeters dangerously. A chicken pecks around the garden outside. There's a strong smell of vinegar. You were expecting an observatory. Instead, it's closer to a chaotic bachelor's nest with scientific ambition leaking out of every drawer. You finally meet the man himself, Galileo Galilei. Thick beard, serious eyes, zero patience. You say hello, awkwardly, and he just hands you a broom. Your grand entrance into science begins with sweeping pigeon feathers off a copy of Aristotle's De Caela. Historians still argue whether Galileo's early assistants were formally trained or just random. Students unlucky enough to say yes. Either way, you're stuck now. Later that night, he shows you the telescope. It's handmade, clunky, and wrapped in a leather cord that smells like old soup. He points it at the sky and mumbles, "You'll be sketching everything you see. Don't mess it up." He doesn't even ask your name. Sleep. Forget it. You're about to spend the next several months squinting at Jupiter until your neck locks up like a rusty hinge. But hey, welcome to the scientific revolution. Galileo is up before dawn. Again, you hear him muttering to himself as he stirs what might be porridge, or maybe it's glue. It smells like both. Your boots are still damp from yesterday's errand to the printer. And your fingers are stained with ink that never seems to wash off. When you finally shuffle into the workroom, he doesn't greet you. He just launches into a rant about how nobody understands parallax and how he's surrounded by fools, including you, probably. Meet the grumpy genius. There's no denying it is brilliant. Watching him work is like watching lightning trapped in human form. Ideas fly out of his mouth faster than you can catch them. He's figuring out how the world actually works while everyone else is still quoting Aristotle and pretending stars are just holes poked in the firmament. But he's also, well, difficult. He snaps when you breathe too loudly. He paces when the quill scratches wrong on the page. He once threw a peach out the window because it was too spherical. Galileo has opinions, lots of them, especially about other scholars. He refers to them with delightful names like intellectual snails, parrots in robes, or that ox from Padua. You jot these down nervously, half laughing, half wondering if one day he'll call you something fruit-based. Historians still argue whether Galileo's sharp tongue was a defense mechanism or just his default mode. Either way, being his assistant means weathering the storm daily. One morning, he quizzes you on the phases of Venus before you've had breakfast. You get one part wrong, Just one ant. He glares like you've insulted his mother and Copernicus in the same breath. You try to explain that you didn't sleep because the telescope wouldn't stay balanced. He doesn't care. The sky waits for no one, he growls. To be fair, he's not always awful. Sometimes, late at night, he reads poetry to the stars. He hums when adjusting the telescope. He once gave you an orange. It was slightly moldy, but it was still nice. He works tirelessly. Days blur into nights. He jots equations on the walls, then forgets and scolds you for writing on them. You're constantly playing a game of, was this genius or garbage? And then, as you're dusting off a heavy book, he stops mid-equation and mutters, "You're lucky, you know?" You get to see how truth is made. You don't feel lucky. You feel tired, underpaid, and slightly afraid of his temper, but you nod anyway. It's only been a week. The workspace is, how do we put this kindly, a disaster zone. You start your morning digging through what looks like the aftermath of a small indoor avalanche. Broken quills, cracked lenses, cheese rinds, and the half-scorched remains of a paper labeled important math. Do not burn. Too late. This is Galileo's laboratory. Smells like boiled cabbage and dust. There's sawdust on the floor, candle wax on every surface. And always some kind of sticky residue you can't identify. Today's task: find the missing eyepiece. He insists it was right there under the sketch of the moon. You check under papers and drawers, even in a suspicious bowl near the fireplace. No eyepiece. 10 minutes later, he finds it in his robe pocket. Kay doesn't apologize, just blames the goblins of disorder. You get the feeling those goblins look a lot like him. His tools are all custom made, mostly by him, mostly held together with wax, cloth strips, and what you're pretty sure is dried animal sinew. The telescope alone is an awkward thing, like someone stretched a pirate's spyglass and gave it trust issues. Every time you touch it, you feel like it's going to snap. Historians still argue whether Galileo's inventions were true engineering marvels or just barely functional prototypes held together by obsessive optimism. Either way, your job is to clean them, fix them, and definitely not break them. The ink pots are everywhere, small clay jars, often spilled. Your hands are constantly black with it. And yet, somehow, he demands perfect copies of all his notes. No smudges, no flourishes. This is science, not poetry, he growls. You also discover his experiments sometimes involve things you wish they didn't. One afternoon, you walk in to find him boiling cow eyes. He says it's for a refractive study. You say nothing, you just try not to breathe through your nose. Some days, he forgets to eat. Other days, he forgets you haven't eaten. Once, he gives you a chunk of bread so stale you could sketch the moon on it. But buried in the mess, in the cracked glass and crumpled paper, are flashes of brilliance. He's written notes on how to measure time with a swinging lamp. You find diagrams of Saturn with little squiggles that will someday be known as rings. You keep sweeping, you keep inking, you keep hoping he'll invent soap next. And when he finally looks up from his calculations to mutter, this might change everything. You pause, you breathe. You feel it too. It's dark, really dark. The kind of dark where the stars feel too close, like they're breathing down your neck. You're outside, wrapped in a rough cloak, ink stains on your sleeves, and a quill tucked behind one ear. Your fingers are stiff, your toes are numb, and you're sketching the moon for the 5th night in a row. Welcome to midnight observation duty. Galileo insists on charting every little bump and shadow. He wants drawings, dozens of them. Quick, he says, before the clouds come. Never mind that your fingers are shaking and the telescope is wobbling every time the wind picks up. Tonight, the moon is low, yellowish, and weirdly smug looking. Through the lens, you see jagged edges. It's not the smooth, perfect sphere described in all the old books. Nope, it's rough, pitted, mountains, even. This part blows your mind a little. Galileo starts babbling about how this proves the moon is imperfect, just like Earth. Not some glowing divine orb. It's just another hunk of rock floating in space. You sketch what you see, your lines messy from cold and fatigue. He scowls. Again, make the craters sharper. You bite your tongue and keep drawing. Historians still argue whether Galileo's moon sketches were entirely his own hand, or if assistants people like you drew most of them. You're not allowed to sign anything. Your name goes nowhere. The night air bites harder. A dog howls in the distance. Galileo hums tunelessly while taking notes, completely immune to the chill. You consider, very briefly, throwing the inkpot into a bush and running back to bed. But then the clouds clear, and there it is, a sliver of light cutting across the dark lunar surface, revealing ridges and shadows like you've never seen. It's breathtaking. Galileo notices your awe. He doesn't smile, of course, not, but he does say, "Now you understand." You do? Sort of. Even if you can't feel your fingers anymore. He jots something in his notebook, says it's going in Sidereus Nuncius, his upcoming publication. The one that might shake the world or get him in trouble with Rome, or both. Then he hands you the telescope and walks off. "Clean it," he calls, carefully. You stare at the retreating back of your irritable genius boss, your cold hands cradling this flimsy, precious tube of truth, and the moon just hangs there, watching. You've been holding this telescope for over an hour. Your shoulders ache, your wrists feel like boiled noodles, and your neck is permanently bent at a 45-degree angle. Galileo stands behind you, making little grunting noises every time you wobble. This is telescope duty, and it's brutal. The device itself isn't exactly ergonomic. It's long, heavy, and kind of lumpy, more like a spyglass built by a medieval carpenter than a fine scientific instrument. Galileo built it himself, of course, brags about it constantly. "Mine can magnify 20 times, he says, waving it like a sword. We try not to point out the leather wrap is coming loose. Your job? Keep it steady. Point it at Jupiter or Venus or whatever shiny speck he's yelling about tonight. Now, and whatever you do, don't sneeze." The thing is, even breathing too hard sends the view drifting. Galileo snaps his fingers. "Back. You lost it. Back you go," nudging it millimeter by agonizing millimeter until the image reappears. Historians still argue whether Galileo's instruments were good enough for precise data, or if he mostly just squinted and guessed really well. You're leaning toward option 2. Tonight, he's particularly intense. He wants to watch Jupiter's moons. You find the planet, zoom in, and sure enough, there they are. Little stars, moving, changing position, night by night. Not fixed, not circling Earth. "Draw," he commands. You switch positions, and he takes over, scribbling, while you hold the telescope again. For hours, your spine has fully given up. You shift your weight from foot to foot. Then it happens. The tripod leg gives a tiny creak. You flinch. Deuce. Galileo sighs. Long, deep, apocalyptic. "This is why I work alone," he mutters. You clench your teeth. You didn't even want this job. You were supposed to be studying philosophy. Now you're manually tracking moons while getting passive-aggressively roasted by the father of modern science. He finally lets you stop around 3 in the morning. Your hands are shaking. He hands you a stale biscuit and says, "Tomorrow, we do Saturn." You look up at the stars, wincing as your neck clicks into place. Great. More dots, more craters, more grumbling. You mutter, "I should have been a baker." The sky doesn't answer. It's mid-morning and your hands still ache from holding the telescope all night. You haven't had breakfast, less a sip of candle-warmed water counts Galileo. It's already barking equations at you from the other room. "Write this down," he shouts. "Distance equals velocity times time." Again. No. Faster. This is your life now. speed writing formulas you barely understand, hoping your quill doesn't snap mid-sentence. Galileo talks fast, corrects faster, and has absolutely no tolerance for your questions. He treats your confusion like a personal insult. One time, you dared to ask what a parabola really was. He just stared at you for a solid 10 seconds and then said, "Did you hit your head as a child?" It's hard to keep up. It's jumping from pendulums to cannonballs to planetary motion like it's casual dinner conversation. Sometimes he forgets to finish a sentence. Sometimes he repeats the same idea 3 times but in different angry voices. Historians still argue whether Galileo invented some concepts before he fully understood them, or if he just had a gift for improvising around gaps. You're leaning toward chaotic genius. One particularly brutal afternoon, he makes you sit through a math test. Not officially, of course, he'd never admit to testing you. But he throws out questions like, "What's the square root of 289? I'm pretending to look for ink. You get it wrong?" Okay. Sighs so dramatically that even the chickens outside seem offended. But then he sits down beside you, starts explaining something about falling bodies. How, contrary to Aristotle, heavier objects don't fall faster. He rolls a small lead ball and a wooden one down a plank, nodding as they hit the ground nearly together. Your eyes widen. But that's not what we learned. He grins, sacrally grins, and says, "Exactly. It's a rare moment of calm." A glimpse of the teacher behind the terror. But it doesn't last. It's within minutes. He's yelling again, this time about air resistance and friction. You're back to scribbling, blinking away the math tears. You consider faking the flu? Maybe break a toe? How bad would it be to accidentally fall into a well? But then, late in the day, he sketches something wild. A curve, looping beautifully, meant to show how objects accelerate as they fall. And for a split second, you get it. You actually get it. It's followed by a new assignment. Copy his entire notebook by morning. Never mind. You're balancing a delicate glass lens in your palm, hands trembling slightly because Galileo is watching like a hawk. This thing, this tiny curved circle, is worth more than your entire wardrobe, okay? Maybe more than your entire family. And if you drop it, it's made it very clear. That's a month's pay, assuming I ever pay you. You try to laugh. He does not. This is the part no one talks about when they romanticize the great minds of history. The gear, the precious, fragile, outrageously expensive gear. Lenses must be ground by hand, shaped with obsessive care, and stored where cats can't sit on them. You've already seen that happen once. The cat survived. The lens didn't. Today, you're helping fit a new lens into the telescope. Galileo claims it'll double the clarity. He says this while chewing fennel seeds and pacing behind you. It's not intimidating at all. The lens doesn't fit perfectly. You suggest adjusting the mount. He growls. Or perhaps you adjusted it wrong to begin with. Historians still argue whether Galileo's assistants made minor errors in the instruments or if Galileo himself was just bad at woodworking. Either way, you're getting the blame. Later, while trying to clean another lens with a soft cloth, it slips from your fingers. It doesn't fall. No worse, it chips. It's just the edge. Tiny, barely visible. Galileo sees it instantly. The silence is heavy. He lifts the lens, squints, runs a finger along the rim, and whispers, "Do you understand what you've done? You want to lie? Blame the wind. Blame a ghost." But instead, you nod. He doesn't yell. That's worse. He just sits down, muttering numbers under his breath, scratching a diagram of Saturn's rings with a slightly shakier hand. For the rest of the day, he barely speaks. Just gestures when he needs something. You become invisible. A pair of legs, a quill, a quiet presence in the corner. That night, you overhear him say to himself, "Even now, people think knowledge is cheap." You want to tell him you understand that truth is fragile. that even chipped glass can still bend light. Instead, you sweep the floor. Again, carefully. It starts with whispers. First, a neighbor's wife won't make eye contact when she passes you near the fountain. Then the grocer mentions, casually, that some ideas are best left alone. You don't even know what you bought, maybe onions, but suddenly your hands are sweating. You return to the house. Galileo is scribbling away, mumbling something about heliocentrism in Jupiter's moons. He doesn't notice the tension in your shoulders. Or maybe he just doesn't care. People are talking, and not in the wow, what a genius kind of way. Rumor is, Galileo's ideas aren't just bold, they're dangerous, saying the earth moves, is that the sun's at the center of the universe. That's not just science, it's heresy. And heresy gets you visits from them. You hear the name whispered more than once. Inquisition. The church has eyes and ears, and men in long black robes who don't find telescope sketches amusing. Galileo brushes it off with a wave. They're ignorant, he says. Clerics with dusty brains and power complexes, but his hand trembles slightly when he says it. Historians still argue whether Galileo fully understood the political fire he was playing with Thor, if he simply thought reason would protect him. You're starting to think he gambled everything, including you. One night, he sits you down, says if anyone asks, we only observe. We describe what we see. We do not claim the heavens move. Then he chuckles, but of course, they do move. You don't laugh, because you've seen the letters, the coded phrases, the parts of the manuscript crossed out, rewritten, softened. He's trying to make truth sound like suggestion. You start sleeping with your shoes by the bed, just in case someone knocks in the night hand. It's not the baker. The mood in the city shifts. Philosophers argue louder. Priests pause longer before speaking. And Galileo, he just sharpens his quill and tells you to prepare more observations. He's not backing down. And you're not sure you can. You're in the garden again. Not to relax. Galileo doesn't believe in relaxing, but to help drop assorted objects from various heights. Why? Because he insists that everything must be tested, even gravity, especially gravity. So here you are on a shaky ladder, holding a sack of pebbles, a clay jug, a roasted chestnut. For some reason, a fish. Don't ask. Galileo swears it's part of the experiment. He points to a square of cloth on the ground below. Drop them all from the same height. I want to see which hits first. You ask if the fish is strictly necessary, squints, and says, everything falls, even your questions. You sigh and begin. The results are mixed. Some things hit together, others don't. The chestnut bounces into the rosemary bush. The fish lands with a squish that may haunt you forever. He's scribbling furiously. You can't tell if he's pleased or furious. Probably both. Historians still argue whether Galileo actually dropped balls off the Leaning Tower of Pisa, as legend claims, or if that story was just a later flourish. But he did love gravity. And you're the unpaid gravity intern. After the drops, he tries timing them. You get to be the one with the stopwatch. Except there isn't a stopwatch. It's just a water clock made of a pierced ladle and a tin bowl. Every splash means 1 unit of time. Your job is to listen for the exact plop as objects hit the ground and count water drops simultaneously. You are now an audio metronome with frostbite. One test involves rolling objects down planks angled slightly downhill. Galileo calls it a controlled descent. You call it chasing marbles in the dirt while my knees scream. A nobleman passes by the fence, peers in, and asks, "What are you doing?" You say, "Science." He frowns, "With vegetables." Galileo shouts from behind the fig tree, "It's a model of acceleration." You nod, clutching your bruised dignity and a half-cracked cabbage. By sunset, your clothes are streaked with mud, your arms sore, and you smell faintly of sardines and failure. Galileo beams. We proved a principle today. You smile weakly. Which one? That I'm right. Figures. You've seen the moons of Jupiter more times than you've seen your own reflection lately. And tonight's no different. You're hunched over the telescope again, your eye pressed to the lens, trying to track for tiny specks wobbling across the black void. Galileo paces nearby, muttering calculations and chewing on dried figs. Count them, he says. Again. You've already counted them. 3 to the left of Jupiter, 1 to the right, unless that's a speck of dust. You rub your eye and check again. Yep, 4. Still 4. Still cold. Galileo insists on nightly observations to track their movement. He wants to prove they orbit Jupiter, not Earth. It's a big deal. It punches holes in the neat little picture of an Earth-centered universe. But it also means hours of tedium. You sketch, you count, you mark positions on parchment, all while your fingers cramp and your ink freezes. Historians still argue whether these nightly logs were entirely Galileo's work, or if he leaned heavily on his assistant's poor, underdressed and underfed souls like you. Tonight, he adds a new twist. He wants you to name the moons. You suggest something fun. He ignores you. They shall be the Medicean stars, he says grandly. To honor the Medici family. You nod slowly, understanding the game now. Science wrapped in flattery. He's not just chasing truth, he's chasing support. And maybe a pension. You keep sketching. Jupiter's moons are stubborn little dots. They shift slightly each hour, a cosmic dance that says, clear as anything, the Earth is not the center. Can you imagine? Galileo says softly, leaning beside you. How many minds will break with this? You pause. That's the thing, he's not trying to destroy old ideas just to be clever. He genuinely believes he's lifting the curtain on the universe. Still, you wish he'd lift a curtain over your hands. They're ice blocks. You sneeze. The telescope jolts. Galileo sighs and starts rechecking the position of every moon, grumbling in Tuscan. You apologize? He waves a hand. At least Jupiter doesn't sneeze. You consider saying, not that we know of, but you value your job, okay? Your teeth. So you just go back to counting. For little moons, for little headaches. One very loud astronomer. There's a thick Latin manuscript spread across the table. The title alone is 10 words long. None of them are familiar. You sigh. Galileo's voice echoes from the other room. Translate chapter 3. And be accurate this time. Welcome to the least glamorous part of science, translating old texts in a language you barely passed in school. Latin grammar haunts your dreams now. So many cases, so many declensions. You would trade your shoes for a good dictionary. The manuscript is a dense, dusty beast, something about planetary motion and the nature of spheres. Maybe, you think. Possibly, the author writes in long, winding sentences that seem designed to cause migraines. You attempt a line. It reads something like, concerning the fourth celestial orb, whose perfect rotation doth, and then trails into a mess of theological metaphor and math. Galileo walks in, takes one look at your draft, and snorts. Copernicus would cry if he saw that. You try not to cry. Historians still argue whether Galileo ever truly mastered Latin translation himself, or if he just relied heavily on assistants with better patience and better dictionaries. You flip through pages filled with strange symbols, illustrations of orbits, and the occasional poetic ramble about divine harmony. Whoever wrote this had never met Galileo. Divine harmony is not something he tolerates before lunch. You finally piece together a passable paragraph. Galileo reads it, grunts, and rewrites half of it in the margins with thicker ink and twice the sarcasm. Later, you're tasked with comparing Latin to Italian versions of ancient texts to spot errors. Galileo says, you have the eyes of a hawk, which is flattering until he adds, but the brain of a turtle. By dusk, your head is pounding. The manuscript pages blur together. A candle drips onto your sleeve. You don't even flinch. Just keep translating. You find one phrase in a margin. Non omnis era est stultus. Not every error is foolish. You smile. It's the most relatable thing you've read all week. Galileo leans over your shoulder. That's wrong. Fix it. Of course it is. You've developed a theory. Galileo has never met a bathtub he liked, or soap, or anything that resembles basic hygiene. The lab smells unique. A heady blend of candle smoke, goat cheese, wet parchment, and something vaguely sour that might be ancient wine or yesterday's stew. You're afraid to ask. This morning, he sneezed into a rag, then used it to clean a lance. You didn't say anything? You're pretty sure correcting him would get you turned into a planetary metaphor. And then there's his robe. It's the same one every day, once brown, now a patchy shade of scientific grime. You offered to mend a tear in the sleeve once. He looked at you like you'd suggested rewriting the laws of motion. Historians still argue whether Galileo's hygiene habits were typical of his era, or if he was just particularly resistant to washing. You suspect it's a mix of Renaissance norms and stubborn genius syndrome. The worst is the ink. It's everywhere, on his fingers, his sleeves, the table, your face. He dips his quill with such wild enthusiasm that droplets fly like tiny black comets. You started wearing a scarf as a makeshift ink shield, and don't get started on his system for organizing notes. There are scrolls wedged into candle holders, diagrams crammed behind loose bricks. Once, you found calculations on the back of a shopping list next to the word plums, underlined twice. You tried tidying once, just once. He walks in, stops cold, and stares like you've rearranged the stars. Where's my chart of star magnitudes? He demands. In the folder marked charts, you reply. He snorts. It was better in the candle drawer. You give up. The lab belongs to him, and to dust, and probably to a small civilization of ants in the corner near the broken pendulum. At lunch, he asks you to bring in more vinegar. You're not sure if it's for cleaning, cooking, or another experiment involving rotting grapes and celestial theory. Probably all three. You once joked that he should invent a soap-based telescope. He didn't laugh, just mumbled something about optics being cleaner than people. And somehow, that kind of made sense. You've made another mistake. Just a small one. A decimal point out of place in a calculation about the moon's distance. And now, Galileo is yelling. Not just muttering or grumbling, yelling. It's full volume, hands flailing, dramatic Tuscan opera yelling. How can a man measure the heavens if his assistant can't count to 10 without tripping over a fraction? He bellows. You resist the urge to point out that you're not a man, and technically, you haven't tripped over anything today. Not physically, anyway. He storms across the room, waving the parchment like a battle flag. A very angry, very disappointed battle flag. I said 8.16, not 8.61. This isn't bread. We're baking. This is celestial mechanics. You mumble an apology, eyes on the floor. You correct the numbers, hands trembling slightly. You don't cry. You don't dare cry. But it'd be worse than the math. Historians still argue whether Galileo's temper was exaggerated in later accounts, or if he really was as fiery as his writing suggests. Based on first-hand experience, you'd say the historians are being polite. You've learned to spot the warning signs, the sharp inhale before a scolding, the twitch of his eyebrow, the moment he picks up a quill like it's a weapon. Once, he snapped a ruler clean in half when a visitor suggested comets were atmospheric illusions. That visitor left before dessert, but for all his fury, there's brilliance under the bluster. After the shouting dies down, he explains the corrected equations, lowly, precisely. He draws it out, a curve representing orbital velocity, how it flattens as distance increases. See, he says, tapping the parchment. Even the cosmos forgives a little imbalance. You nod, you do see it now. Then he adds, without looking up. Still, make another mistake like that, okay? And I'll make you copy Euclid's elements backwards. You're not sure if he's joking. Probably not. Later, he calms down and offers you a piece of pear. It's bruised, but warm from his coat pocket. You accept it with cautious gratitude. Science is hard. Being screamed at by it is harder. Still, you stay. It's barely light out, and Galileo is already handing you another stack of parchment. Take this to Signor Calvo. Tell him I want the plates engraved precisely. You squint at the pages, scribbled star charts, tangled Latin notes, and what looks like a very cranky drawing of Saturn. What if he asks questions? You mutter. Galileo waves dismissively. Say whatever makes him work faster. Tell him it's urgent. Tell him the Pope wants it. He pauses. Kay, don't say that last one yet. And so begins your least favorite job. Manuscript errands. You shuffle through narrow alleys, parchment wrapped in oiled cloth, dodging carts, chickens, and a monk who side-eyes you like you're carrying contraband, which, frankly, you might be. The print shop is dim and smells like ash and hot metal. Signor Calvo greets you with the warmth of an undercooked turnip. Another batch. He grumbles. The last one smudged. The ink's too thick. You hand him Galileo's notes. He groans as he flips through them. Why does he write like an angry goat? Good question, if you don't have an answer. Historians still argue whether Galileo's manuscripts were difficult to print. Because of the content, simply because his handwriting was a tangled mess of genius and impatience. You stay while Calvo's apprentice sets the type. It's tedious, loud, and ink gets everywhere again. You notice a letter, missing from one line, and fix it just in time. Otherwise, Galileo might accuse you of sabotaging science. Once, a single printing, error mixing up immobile with mobile made him rewrite 3 pages. You remember? You were there? You heard the shouting. After several hours, Calvo hands you back a proof. Tell your master if he wants better results, he should stop writing in the margins with soot. You smile weakly, accept the page, and sprint back through the streets like it's the last loaf of bread in winter. Galileo takes the proof, sniffs it. Why does he sniff everything? And frowns. This diagram is upside down. You blink. Are you sure? He glares. Am I sure about Saturn? Fair point. He hands it back. Again, but faster. You sigh. You were hoping to eat today. Maybe tomorrow. Maybe never. It happens on a quiet evening. The fire is low, the ink is drying, and for once, Galileo isn't yelling. It's even humming low. Off-key tune that might be a hymn, or might just be his thinking music. Then comes the knock. Not the usual thump of the baker's boy or the soft tap of a curious student. This one's sharp, slow, measured. 3 men stand at the door. Long black robes, silver crosses, little smiles. Your stomach drops straight through the floor. Galileo straightens, suddenly very still. He doesn't invite them in. He doesn't have to. They step over the threshold like shadows. One carries a scroll, another a sealed letter with the PayPal seal. The third just stares at you, expression blank as stone. Galileo Galilei, the lead man says, voice smooth as old wood. We bring inquiries from the Holy Office. Your hands go cold. Your thoughts race. Asterisk. Is it the moons? Is it sunspots? The book he hasn't published yet? Galileo bows slightly, just slightly, and says, I am always eager to share knowledge. The third man glances at the papers scattered on the table. Diagrams of Saturn, an unfinished letter to Kepler, sketch of the sun with dark patches. He picks one up, says nothing, folds it carefully. Historians still argue whether this was the moment Galileo realized his theories had reached dangerous ground door, if he had known all along, and this was simply the storm finally arriving. You stand silently as they question him. He keeps his voice calm, steady, careful, not too defiant, not too submissive. A tightrope walk across flames. Then they look at you. You assist him? Your throat tightens, only with ink and tea. It's not entirely a lie. They nod, slowly. One scribbles something on a parchment. You hope it's not your name. After what feels like a century, the men leave. Basing, they'll return. Galileo locks the door behind them. He doesn't speak for a long time. Brow stares into the fire, brow furrowed, lips pressed thin. Finally, he mutters, "The church looks kindly on silence." You don't reply. Neither of you sleeps that night. Galileo hands you a cloak and a small, crumpled letter. "You're going to Bologna," he says flatly, "and you're going to act normal?" You raise an eyebrow. "What's normal?" He sighs. "Buy a loaf of bread. Complain about the weather. Ask Professor Barty what he's been observing lately, casually. Don't let on that you're there for science." You blink. "You want me to spy on another astronomer?" "No," he says. "I want you to observe someone who might be stealing my ideas and spreading Aristotelian nonsense like mold on bread." Same thing. And so begins your new role. Scientific spy. You tuck Galileo's note inside your boot. Practice your casual face and head out before dawn, wrapped in wool and nerves. Bologna is lively. Loud markets, church bells, scholars arguing in corners. You find Professor Bardier's the only one loudly comparing Mars to a divine cartwheel. You ease into earshot, pretend to shop for pears, nod thoughtfully as he mutters about celestial perfection. You stifle a snort when he claims the earth doesn't move because God prefers stability. Historians still argue whether Galileo truly feared rival astronomers or just enjoyed stirring drama. Judging by how tightly he gripped your elbow this morning, you'd say it's both. Barty boasts that his recent star maps align perfectly with the teachings of Ptolemy. You resist the urge to throw a fruit. Instead, you memorize everything, especially his parting comment. Galilei is clever, but reckless. By evening, you return to Florence, scribbled notes hidden inside a loaf of rye. Galileo tears it open, reads silently, and chuckles darkly. "Reckless," he mutters. He should try being correct for once. You don't know whether to be proud or nervous. Probably both. Later, as you copy your spy report into his growing file of academic threats, Galileo pats your shoulder and says, "You're learning the true art of science." You nod, but secretly you miss the part of science that didn't involve disguises and rye bread. Still, it's oddly thrilling. And, let's be honest, your cloak looks great, billowing in the wind. You're standing in the doorway, holding a fresh sketch of the sun. It's blotchy. It's not bright and glorious like church paintings, more like it has acne. Galileo beams. "Perfect. Send it to Rome, to the Academy, and to Princessi." "No, wait. Add a note. Confirmed again this morning." The sun is not unchanging. You glance at the drawing again. Smudged ink circles, swirling spots, dark centers like tiny bruises, sunspots. This is the new scandal. Forget Jupiter's moons or Venus's phases. Now Galileo's poking holes in the idea that the heavens are perfect, literally, and you're the one licking stamps. You bundle the letters, tuck the drawings carefully inside, and walk to the courier shop like you're not carrying scientific dynamite. Everyone smiles politely. No one knows you're distributing blasphemy. Historians still argue whether Galileo truly discovered sunspots independently or merely improved upon what others had noticed. Either way, he's made them famous and controversial. Later that evening, a courier returns. One of the letters to a cardinal has been returned unopened. The message: "This subject is better left untouched." Galileo doesn't flinch. He just sharpens his quill. If they ignore the spots, he says, it's because they're afraid to admit the sun itself is stained. You copy more drawings. The sun changes every day. The spots grow, shrink, drift. Sometimes they disappear. Galileo is thrilled. You're exhausted. He writes furious replies to critics. Sunspots are not atmospheric, he hisses. They move with the sun's rotation. I've measured it. You nod and keep sketching, your eyes aching from too much glare. You tried smoked glass once, but it burned your thumb. Your favorite sunspot looks like a duck. Galileo scowls when you mention it. These are not clouds, he says. They are proof. Another day, another batch of letters. One goes to a noble in Venice who called the spots a flaw in the lens. Galileo writes back, then kindly explain why my lens has flaws that rotate every 27 days. You chuckle. He doesn't. In a dusty drawer, you now keep all the rejected sketches. They're oddly beautiful, imperfect circles, rough outlines, angry little truths. You wonder what would happen if someone nailed them to a church door. You don't, obviously, but still. Galileo tosses you a letter, sealed in red wax and smelling faintly of pickled quills. Another one from Bacon, he says, grinning. Let's see if he's finally said something useful. Francis Bacon. Not the food, the philosopher, the thinker. The guy in England who keeps writing about method and logic like he's inventing sliced bread. Galileo both respects him and constantly mutters that he's too slow with conclusions. You break the seal. It's long, dense, elegant, in a smug, English kind of way. No actual answers, just more talk of careful observations, structured reasoning, and the dignity of experimentation. Galileo skims it, rolls his eyes, and goes back to arguing with Jupiter. Your new task, copy Galileo's responses to Bacon, in triplicate, with perfect Latin and zero smudges. He wants to make sure Bacon understands his view of science, fast, bold, and visible through a telescope. Tell him, Galileo says, pacing, that while he theorizes in his armchair, I'm watching the moons move in real time. You scribble that down, carefully tone it down, carefully remove the insult, doesn't notice. Historians still argue whether Galileo and Bacon truly influenced each other or simply passed like ships in the night, both sailing toward modern science on very different winds. To you, it feels like watching two old scholars throw beautifully worded paper airplanes at each other from different countries. You're in charge of keeping the replies flowing. Drafts, rewrites, translations. Galileo says, make it sharp but subtle. You translate that as, insult him without getting punched. One morning, you discover a forgotten draft under a pile of sunspot sketches. It says simply, asterisk, Dear Bacon, we don't need more talk. We need more telescopes. You love it. Galileo doesn't remember writing it. Later that week, another letter arrives. Not from Bacon, but from a lesser English noble, claiming Galileo's ideas are imaginative but poorly supported. Galileo slaps the table so hard the ink splashes. Poorly supported, he roars. I invented support. You write a response, dip the quill, pause, then just write, asterisk, respectfully. No. He reads it, smiles faintly, make it longer, but not better. You get to work, again, and secretly, you kind of want to send Bacon a telescope. The ink is still drying on the latest letter to Bacon when Galileo bursts into the room, waving a new pamphlet. They've published another attack. He growls. This time, they call me an arrogant mechanic with dangerous ideas. You take the paper, gingerly. It's a printed critique, anonymous, sub-corsand, loaded with flowery insults. T calls his sunspots smudges of imagination and accuses him of worshipping the telescope more than the truth. Galileo doesn't take it well. He throws the pamphlet on the floor, steps on it twice for good measure, then immediately starts writing a response. You, of course, are summoned to edit. What should we call them? He asks, quill already twitching. Cowards in cloaks. Blind theologians. You suggest a gentleman of cautious conviction. He scoffs. That sounds like a whine. Editing Galileo's responses is a full-time job. You go through drafts where he compares critics to barn animals, to fog, to actual dirt. Your task, make them sharp. Reader Bland, not likely to get him excommunicated. Historians still argue whether Galileo's pamphlets were toned down by assistance or made worse by encouragement. Based on your edits, you'd say both. Tonight, he's particularly fired up. He writes a devastating line. Asterisk. They accuse me of peering through glass, yet they themselves stare only into mirrors. You pause mid-copy. That one's good. Another critic, a Jesuit scholar, has accused him of heresy for suggesting the heavens change. Galileo writes, asterisk, then they must ban the moon next, for she changes nightly and has not yet been punished. You cut that line. Barely. He doesn't notice. The next day, copies of his response go out across Italy. He delivered them in person to a few scholars who read silently, then shake their heads. Brilliant, one mutters. But reckless. You hear that word a lot now. Back at the house, Galileo is already working on his next rebuttal. Truth, he says, is like a lion. It doesn't need defense. It's just a louder roar. You nod, hand him fresh parchment, and quietly wonder if lions ever get tired of roaring. Venus is glowing in the early evening sky, brighter than usual, hovering low and smug like it knows something you don't. Galileo is already at the telescope, motioning frantically. Come look. This is it. This proves everything. You peer through the lens. There it is, Venus. But it doesn't look like a round little star. It's a crescent. It's a thick silver crescent. You blink, adjust the lens. Still a crescent. Galileo is practically bouncing. Do you understand? It has phases like the moon. You nod slowly. You do understand. This means Venus orbits the sun, not the Earth. If it orbited Earth, it would always look like a circle. But here it is, changing shape like a lunar impersonator. This changes everything. Historians still argue whether Galileo saw every phase of Venus clearly or inferred some from limited data, but tonight, it doesn't matter. The crescent glows. The universe tilts. You spend hours sketching what you see. Thin slivers, gibbous forms, the delicate curve of planetary truth. Galileo dictates notes while pacing in tight circles, muttering about Copernicus, Aristarchus, and the fools who worship geocentrism like it's scripture. But as the night deepens, attention grows. You feel it. He feels it. This kind of proof won't just rattle cages. It'll set them on fire. The church will not like this, you say. Galileo snorts. They already don't like me. He's writing a letter to Kepler now. You can barely keep up. Mentions of heliocentrism, motion, sacred geometry. He ends it with, asterisk. The heavens tell a different story than Rome allows. You pause before sealing it. That line alone could earn him a trial. Maybe worse. He doesn't care. He's too far in. It's too close to the truth. You return to the telescope. Venus is thinner now, a delicate shard of light. It's beautiful, quiet, dangerous. You wonder how something so small, so far away, can make everything on Earth feel so fragile. Galileo taps the paper stack beside you. We publish this. You nod, slowly, because at this point, there's no turning back. The first printed copy of Sidereus Nuncius arrives wrapped in linen, still smelling of warm ink and vinegar glue. Galileo holds it like a newborn, grinning, breathless, already finding typos. You don't point out that one of the star charts is upside down. You'll fix it in the next batch. Maybe. The book goes out fast. Venice, Rome, Padua. Within weeks, people are whispering about the starry messenger. He's no longer just a local oddball with a telescope. He's a star, a celestial star, ironically. And as his fame grows, so does his ego. You notice it first when he starts referring to himself in the third person. Galilei has revealed what Ptolemy could not. Then come the invitations. Nobles want private star viewings. Scholars request signed copies. Princes send couriers asking for a demonstration of the heavens. You're the one setting up the telescope, hauling crates, explaining the basics, while Galileo prepares dramatic pauses. He performs like a poet now, tilts the scope, lets the viewers gasp. Sometimes he says things twice just for effect. Historians still argue whether Galileo was driven more by truth or recognition. You're starting to suspect the two were tightly braided in his brain. At a banquet in Padua, someone asks you if Galileo is always this theatrical. You smile and say, only when he's awake. Galileo writes more letters, sends them across Europe, brags that he's observed the unseen, unveiled the moon, named the moons of Jupiter. You remind him that you helped sketch those. He waves it off. You are part of my instruments, he says once, not unkindly, dismissively. Still, you watch the world lean in. You hear students whisper his name like it's magic. You see university heads scramble to align themselves with his theories. And Galileo, he stands taller, laughs louder, eats better cheese. You, meanwhile, still haven't been paid. The Pope used to like him. That was the rumor, anyway. Pope Urban VIII, educated, cultured, even fond of astronomy in his younger years. Galileo once called him a man of reason. They exchanged letters, shared pleasantries, even poetry. It felt safe. But now things feel different. Galileo's new manuscript is nearly complete. It's bold, loud, titled dialogue concerning the two chief world systems. You helped copy it 3 full drafts, each longer and more sarcastic than the last. The book features 3 fictional characters: Salviati, who's clearly Galileo; Sagredo, a friendly noble; and Simplicio, the simpleton. Guess which one defends the geocentric model? You warned him. Won't people think you're mocking the church? He waved you off. It's satire. Besides, I'm not calling the Pope Simplicio. It's just coincidence. Historians still argue whether Galileo was being deliberately provocative or just tone deaf to politics. But you saw the way he smirked writing Simplicio's lines. You saw the glee. Once the book is printed, the backlash comes quick. Word spreads that the Pope is furious, not just disappointed, furious. He reportedly slammed a copy on the table and said, "So I am the fool, then." You stare at the walls of Galileo's study. They seem to close in. Letters stop arriving. Friends grow distant. The air thickens. One evening, Galileo slumps at the table, hands pressed to his temples. "They're going to call me to Rome," he says quietly, "and not for a celebration." You don't say anything. You both know what it means. House arrest, trial, the Inquisition. You think of the telescope, sitting dusty by the window. It's the moons, Venus, the dancing sunspots. But you wonder how something so clear could land someone in such danger. Galileo looks at you. "Burn the drafts," he says. You don't. Not yet. Just fold them quietly. Because deep down, you suspect this is only the beginning. The villa is quiet now. It's too quiet. Galileo isn't pacing anymore. He just sits by the window, staring out at the hills, as if the answers to the universe might be hiding behind a cypress tree. He's under house arrest. Not the loud, dramatic kind, no chains or dungeon bars. Just rules. He cannot leave. He cannot publish. Cannot speak freely. And you've moved in. The place is cold. Mold creeps along the walls. The shutters groan in the wind like ghosts disagreeing with your life choices. Your mattress is a sack of straw in a drafty corner room. There's no money left for firewood. Galileo insists it's invigorating to work in the cold. He's wearing 3 robes. You're wrapped in your only blanket like a sad burrito. Historians still argue whether Galileo's punishment was merciful or merely elegant cruelty. He wasn't burned. They silenced him where it hurt most, his voice. Still, the questions don't stop. He wakes you at odd hours. What if the tides are caused by Earth's rotation? Or did you see how the lantern swings in the chapel? It's time, right there. You write it all down, by candlelight, half frozen. Sometimes visitors come, quiet ones, students, friends, people who still believe he changed everything. They knock softly, slip in for a cup of wine, a whispered conversation, a few glances toward the covered telescope. He's not allowed to discuss astronomy, so he just talks about the moon, metaphors, poetry, a silver mirror, he says, pocked with truth. At night, he stares up at the stars through the window. He can't see much anymore. His eyesight is fading. But you describe what you can. Still for moons, you whisper. He smiles. Then we are not alone in motion. The fire crackles weakly. He drifts off in the chair, muttering about pendulums. You stay by the window. I watch the sky and wonder if silence can ever stop a mind like his. Galileo is blind now. Not all at once, it happened slowly. Shadows grew thicker. The stars faded. Eventually, he couldn't read his own notes, couldn't see the sketches he'd once obsessed over. But the voice, the voice is still sharp. Write this down, he says. Even darkness cannot silence reason. So you're right. Every day, you sit beside him, quill in hand, ready to catch every fragmented thought, every whispered theory. He dictates endlessly about tides, comets, pendulums, the strange wobble of the earth. His mind is as fast as ever, even if his eyes are not. He no longer checks your work. He trusts you now. Or maybe he just can't afford not to. Historians still argue whether Galileo's final manuscripts were purely his or co-written through dictation. Either way, the words came from that restless, relentless mind and your tired hand. You read to him constantly. Ancient texts, Psalms, Kepler's latest letters. Once, just to see if he'd notice, you slipped in a page from a cookbook. He listened, nodded, and said, I've always believed onions are misunderstood. You're not sure if he was joking. His days blurred together now. He talks less about stars, more about people. Wonders if the ones who condemned him ever truly looked through a telescope. Wonders if truth always arrives 10 years too late. Sometimes he hums a tunavki, the same one he used to mutter while scribbling sunspots. You hum along just to fill the silence. At night, he asks you to describe the sky. You tell him about Venus, low and bright, or Jupiter, high and steady. He nods, eyes closed. Stare still out there, he says. You want to say, so are you. But you don't, because even genius gets tired. Even lions lie down. Still, every so often, he says something that shakes the dust off the stars. Do you think they'll remember? You grip the quill tighter. They'd be fools not to. He smiles faintly, then begins another theory. Your mother sends a letter. Again. It's short, nervous, and smeared with what might be soup. Come home, she writes. Asterisk, people say you work for a heretic. Father Giulio says he teaches children to doubt God. You fold the letter without replying. You've read the same thing a dozen times now. Out in the village, they call you names softly behind your back. Devil's note-taker, moon servant. One baker offered you bread, then crossed himself 3 times and told you to stay away from his chickens. Galileo doesn't notice, or pretends not to. He's busy debating with no one in particular about planetary motion and the friction of tides. But you feel it, the way people glance at you sideways. How conversations stop when you walk into the square. You once dropped your satchel and someone whispered, even gravity hates the center. Historians still argue whether Galileo's assistants faced real danger or just social discomfort. But you know the truth. Sometimes shame can feel like exile. You start keeping your hood up when you go out. You speak less. Carry your letters tucked deep in your coat. One day, a priest corners you near the fountain. It's not too late, he says. You could walk away, confess, be saved. You don't reply. Just look him in the eye and ask, have you ever looked through a telescope? He doesn't answer. Just walks away, lips moving in prayer. Back at the villa, you tell Galileo about it. He laughs. They used to call me star-cursed. I rather liked it. But late at that night, you catch him staring at the coals on the hearth. Quiet, still. Like he hears every word people won't say to his face. You don't tell him what your mother wrote. You just keep writing. 'Cause if the world wants to fear the stars, that's their choice. You're still going to follow them. Galileo's next bright idea involves wine, a glass tube, and unfortunately, a fish bladder. You're skeptical from the start. This is science, you ask, holding up the odd collection of materials. It's a thermoscope, he says proudly. A device to measure temperature by movement of air and liquid. It's a marvel of the modern age. You glance at the fish bladder, which smells like it's been marveling in the sun for 3 days. And this is necessary. Vital, he replies, stuffing it into the narrow end of the tube. Now, heat the bowl gently. Watch the wine rise. You do as instructed, though your face is twisted into the universal expression of this will end badly. The wine does move, just a little. A delicate ripple inside the tube. Galileo claps his hands like a child watching bubbles for the first time. See? The air expands. The liquid shifts. It's beautiful. It's messy, but yes, also beautiful. Historians still argue whether Galileo's thermoscope actually worked or if it was more demonstration than data tool. You'd argue it worked just enough to impress the right people and spill on your notes. Later, he tries to refine it, places the wine with colored water, then vinegar, then oil. One attempt involves garlic-infused fluid. That one doesn't last long. You're the one who has to clean it up each time, dumping soggy parchment and drying glassware over the hearth. He writes to a friend that he's found the ghost of temperature. You consider replying, "It smells like ghost fish," but you keep the comment to yourself. One night, the thermoscope bursts when the fire flares too high. Galileo barely blinks. Back to the drawing board, he mumbles, wiping wine off his sleeve. You look at the mess and mutter, "Back to the laundry board." He didn't hear you, thank goodness, because tomorrow he wants to try mercury. A nobleman visits today, dressed in fur-lined robes and the kind of hat that screams. I donate to cathedrals, but still believe in horoscopes. He's here for a reading not of stars, but of himself. Heard Galileo refuses to cast horoscopes, he says, smiling in that rich person way where everything sounds like a challenge. You offer him wine? Galileo doesn't look up from his parchment. I want to know if Mars favors my business ventures, the man continues, and whether I'm destined to marry again. My third wife has delicate lungs. Galileo finally raises an eyebrow. Mars favors no one. It's a rock. The noble chuckles, thinking it's a joke. Well, surely you've drawn charts. You must have opinions. That's when it happens. Galileo throws a pair. Not hard, just underhanded, but the meaning is clear. Out, he says flatly. If you want lies, go to a carnival. The noble leaves in a huff, muttering about disrespect and curses. You look at the half-squished pear on the floor. Then at Galileo. Could have used an apple. It's more symbolic. He snorts. I'm saving that for Isaac. Historians still argue whether Galileo ever practiced astrology in secret or just tolerated it to avoid confrontation. But publicly, he loathed it, called it mathematical fiction. That didn't stop people from asking. Letters arrived weekly from merchants, generals, even midwives, all asking where the stars stood on their laundry list of personal anxieties. Galileo never answers. You once caught him scribbling fake star charts just for fun one, predicting romantic doom via goat. He never mailed it. Probably for the best. Later, he tells you the sky is for answers, not wishes. And you believe him? Even when he's muttering that the nobleman's face looked like a moon crater. He's tired of pretending science and superstition can share a table. You sweep up the pair, quietly agree. The villa smells like old ink, burnt olive oil, and overcooked lentils. Galileo hasn't left his chair in hours. He's deep in a ramble about tides. Again. You nod, quill in hand, barely keeping up as he traces long, invisible circles in the air. It's not the moon, he declares. It's Earth's motion, it's sloshing. The oceans are sloshing. Sloshing, you repeat, dutifully writing it down. He launches into a lecture about inertia, the turning Earth, and how water can't help but lag behind. You ask gently, but doesn't the moon? He waves you off. The moon causes nothing. That's superstition. Historians still argue whether Galileo dismissed the moon's role in tides because he didn't trust astrology or simply lacked Newton's math. Either way, he's confident, passionate, and probably wrong. Still, you write every word, because he could be right about something else entirely tomorrow. That's how it goes. Now, long days of dictation. His theories flow like rivers. Heat, motion, light, the shape of pendulums, even musings on music and the soul. Sometimes he repeats himself. Sometimes he drifts into memory. Did I ever tell you, he says, how I saw Saturn's rings for the first time? Thought they were ears? You nod. He has. 3 times. Oh, but you let him tell it again. He jokes that death is a kind of house arrest, just colder. You don't laugh. Not this time. His hands tremble more now. His voice fades by afternoon, but he keeps going, on tides, on the Earth's spin, on the stubbornness of scholars in Rome. You bring warm broth, rub his hands when they cramp. You don't always agree with him, but you never leave. One evening, he asks, do you think the stars care what we say about them? You look out the window. Jupiter gleams, indifferent as ever. No, you whisper. But I think they listen anyway. Galileo nods. Good. Then, let's keep talking. It's early morning. Fog clings low to the hills. The villa is quiet, too quiet. K. You stir the embers in the hearth, waiting for the usual rustle of robes. K. The call for ink or tea or that blasted page I was holding yesterday. But today, there's no sound. You find him in his chair, eyes closed, mouth slightly open, still. You know before touching his shoulder, Galilei is gone. There's no drama, no final speech, just a long breath that never returned. The man who argued with stars, who shouted down cardinals and made the sky speak, has finally gone silent. You sit beside him for a while, listen to the wind tapping at the shutters, the fire sighs. Somewhere outside, a bird sings like it doesn't know the world just shifted. Historians agree on the year 1642, but they rarely mention how ordinary the moment was. No fanfare, no grand audience. Just you, a cold floor, and a stack of unfinished notes. People begin arriving within days. Some cry, some whisper. A few tried to claim credit for his ideas, but none of them stayed up copying theories by candlelight. None scrubbed wine from the thermoscope or dodged pears thrown in protest. You clean the room, fold his robe, lock away the telescope. It feels like boxing up a hurricane. He left no money, no inheritance, just notebooks, letters, drafts, more questions than answers. You inherit the silence and the responsibility. One night, weeks later, you find yourself sketching the moon again, out of habit. Maybe love, you whisper, still imperfect. And for the first time, you say it aloud. It was worth it. Even the yelling, even the ink stains, even the nights you thought your brain would melt, because now someone else will look through glass and know. Thanks to him, thanks to you. Time has moved on. The villa's quieter now. Dust gathers in the corners, and your back aches more than it used to. But your hands still remember how to sketch a moon's crater in the dark. Visitors still come, mostly the curious, kind young thinkers, dreamers, wide-eyed students wanting stories about the legendary Galileo. They smile when they call you his assistant, not realizing how much that role meant. They ask questions like it's a game. Was he a genius? Was he cruel? Did he really change the world? You think for a moment, then answer with a small smile. Yes, but not always in that order. You remember it all. The cold nights spent tracking moons. The sunspots that started arguments across continents. The pages you inked until your fingers cramped. And the man himself, brilliant, bristly, completely impossible. People wonder if it was all worth it. The risk, the ridicule, the quiet punishment that came disguised as exile. You never hesitate. Every bit of it was worth it. Historians still bicker over how much of Galileo's work came from those around him. But you were there. You wrote it down. Without that, all of it might have been lost to wind and time. The telescope still sits near the window. It's dusty, retired, but still watching the stars like a loyal old dog. Sometimes you whisper the names of those moons again, softly, as if they're old friends. And when the night is very still, you swear you can hear a scratchy voice mutter something about Saturn's rings being weird. Galileo may be gone, but the sky still turns. And you're still watching. Now take a breath. Let your shoulders settle. Let your jaw unclench. Let the weight of history ease off your back. You've walked beside someone who challenged the heavens, who dared to look up and say, asterisk, what if we've been wrong? Picture soft candlelight flickering on stone walls. Books closed gently. A telescope resting quietly beside a wooden window frame. Outside, the breeze hums through olive trees, and stars blink calmly in the black sky. Everything's quieter now. No more shouting. No more midnight sketches. No more ink spilled in a rush to outrun dogma. Just the stillness. Just your breath, in through the nose, out through the mouth. Slow and gentle. You follow truth through tangled scrolls and stormy skies. You've carried the spark of curiosity through trial, error, and accusation. And now, the fire's low, the quill is dry. The stars are still up there, whispering secrets, but tonight, they can wait. Let go of the calculations. Let go of the worry. Let your thoughts drift, soft as starlight, through a calm, open sky. There's nothing left to prove, nothing more to chase. Lay this quiet space, this gentle dark, and the knowledge that your journey long, strange, full of light and noise brought you here. You've done enough. Rest now, float, breathe, and let the stars keep watch.